Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what's known as the minimum wage and how it's relevant and how it feeds into a whole lot of other issues in the social economics of the Western nations. Now, there's been a few videos around that have just sort of come up in the last few weeks, I guess, about the minimum wage, and I'm assuming it's relating to like higher petroleum and gasoline prices and higher cost of living, that sort of stuff. So, and there was one video I saw, I think it was yesterday, by VEE about it, and he's covered some good points there. And he does some good stuff. It's worth going over and having a look at his channel if you haven't already. So it's V. I think it's Romanian TV or something like that. So just having a look at the minimum wage across the West now, there's a view in just sort of pure, straight, if you like, 101 economics. If you increase the minimum wage, then that automatically increases unemployment of the least employable people in the workforce or in society generally. That to some extent is true, but the reality is far more nuanced than that. If you look at the mass employer, the mass employers of people, like say the takeout food chains, the supermarket chains, that sort of thing, they're the ones that are employing masses of people that are fairly low skilled. Now, you get now, having been someone who's hired people and fired people, and as a kid, when I was still at school, working like after school type jobs, I was working for the minimum wage, so I kind of understand some of the dynamics around it as well as anybody could anyway. So the reality on the ground is a little bit different from the economic textbooks. Now, I remember sort of working at one minimum wage job where there was quite a few marginal employees. These were employees that you kind of kept them on the books because they were jobs that no one else really wanted to do. They were marginal. They weren't very good at it, but they, what can you do? You kind of put up with it. And so when if the minimum wage, and these people get the minimum wage, if the minimum wage is increased, then that gets most businesses in a competitive marketplace at least to sort of revisit, why am I going to keep this person on? They don't do a very good job. They give me attitude, and I don't need. And the difference between what a minimum wage pays and, say, some sort of government unemployment benefit, there may not be a whole lot in it. And so if the worker's got to, say, travel quite a distance or do anything like that, the money they save, having to pay for the transport to get there and have clean clothes to go to work, all that sort of time, energy and effort and cost they go to, by the time they take that out, the unemployment payment is probably not far off what they would get by working 40 hours a week. So to them, it's no great shakes. They're if they get fired, well, hey, what? Who cares? So it's those people that are not very good at their jobs. They're not motivated. They don't really care. Now, some of that may be because they're, for example, like they're particularly low IQ. Maybe they've got some minor handicap or something like that. But basically, those people are not so much got rid of or fired when minimum wages go up, but the business will revisit why we're keeping this person on. And if the wage goes up a decent amount, the minimum wage, then the business has a better chance of attracting someone who's maybe a bit more motivated, a bit more dedicated, who's going to do a better job, that sort of thing. So you've got all those factors that go into making those decisions. Now, if wages jump by the wage goes from, for example, $10 an hour to, say, $50 an hour, huge jump, which wouldn't happen in real life. But for example, if it did, then any business is going to look, okay, well, what sort of automation can we get? what sort of machinery can we get to, flip the burgers or sweep the floor, or that sort of thing. What can we do to offset this high cost of labour? And if they can get machines in to do some or all of it, then they do. Typically, the better, particularly with the basic jobs, like if you've got someone who'll I don't know, digging holes or something. If you've got someone that gets in there, they can dig that hole, Billy Bob. And Billy Bob, he's into it. He gets the shovel and he's busting his ass and he's digging in there. Sweat pouring off him, and you go, shit, Billy Bob's really good at digging holes. You're probably not going to get rid of, if the wages go up, you're not going to get rid of Billy Bob. He's just too good at what he does. So even though it's a low skill job, by being, he must be a fit guy to do it, but by being industrious and energetic and going at it, accepting direction, happily, this sort of thing, that makes Billy Bob a valued employee. He's going to keep his job. But the guy next to him, he goes, fuck, do I have to dig another fucking hole? Why don't you shove the hole up your ass or something? That sort of thing. That guy, when the wages go up, he might lose his job. So we can get by with fewer people, or because the wages are higher, I can employ someone who's of better quality or better attitude or has more skills. Now, even in the lowest skilled jobs, there's still like a pecking order, if you will, of skills. Like, say, picking apples. You say, well, picking apples, Jesus, what skill do you need of that? Well, there's a few, when you're on the apple tree and you're picking the apples, some apples are ripe and ready for picking, others not. Now, somebody with no skills or experience is just going to pick every apple. And a lot of the apples that need to stay on there for another week or two to mature, they're going to get picked early. But the supermarkets or the fruit stores, they're not going to take those apples. They're only going to take the other apples that are at the right stage of ripeness. So someone who is skilled at this, even though it's a low skilled job generally, someone who is skilled, it can make a big difference. It can make a difference in the apples they pick and when they pick them, and identifying which apple is ready for picking and which isn't. So there's benefit in having people of experience who can offer that knowledge continuity, even though it's a low skilled job. So again, when wages go up, you probably keep that person, whereas you'd be more discerning over the people that you hire in the future, given the increase in minimum wages. So it's far more nuanced than just wages go up, people lose their job. It just doesn't work that way, or there's fewer jobs around. Also, there's a thing of workers or businesses. Some businesses have got very high profits, for example. Maybe they've got monopolies, oligopolies, cartel price. They've got all these sorts of things, so they can sustain a certain increase in wages depending on the mass of employees, of course. They can sustain wages without it really affecting too much, or they can immediately pass it on to the consumer, or they can engage in other things like more aggressive tax minimisation policies, things like that. So the minimum wages used to be, minimum wage of 50 years ago was, or somewhere around the minimum wage 50 years ago. That was kind of enough to, you could do all right. You wouldn't be rich or anything, or living in waterfront property, or have your own Learjet, obviously, but you could get by. So people who are making about the minimum wage, say working in a supermarket or something like that. I remember a couple, husband and wife, they had no kids. I think, no, I don't think they had any kids. They were able to buy a house with that, a very modest house, of course, but buy a house, and they had a car, again, a modest car. But just the two of them working in a supermarket, they made enough money to get by. Now, if you look at that today, they have, the people in the same position today don't have a snowball's chance. So what we've seen is that the cost of living has increased at a much faster rate than the minimum wage, or the average wage for that matter. So we're seeing a situation where people are going to have to live in trailer parks or in communes to be able to get by. So say 5 people or 6 people living on the minimum wage, or working for the minimum wage, say in some basic hospitality type job. a Starbucks or something. They've got 6 of them rent a 3-bedroom apartment. I mean, they'll never own anything in their lives, these people, other than the clothes on their back. But 6 of them live in a 3-bedroom apartment, and pretty basic one. In fact, one of the bedrooms is like a converted closet almost. But there are 3 couples, and the couples are always changing, and new boys and girls getting together, and so it's kind of pretty dynamic. But 6 of them is there. But it takes the wage of 6 of them to be able to afford this pretty basic 3-bedroom apartment. There's got no storage in the apartment. There's no parking or anything. It's a bare bones gig. But that's how many of them it takes to so they're living basically as a commune as it is, and they just can't afford anything better. In fact, they struggle to get by as it is. It wasn't the fact that the cafe or the restaurant what they work in gives lunches and dinners as part of the pay package. Wasn't for that, and then I think they even struggle on what they're on. So this is, I think, is the future. Now, if you look at the amount of people in the United States that are being paid the minimum wage or slightly above it, or in and around that, and sort of encompassing even the lower end of the average wage scale, say $35,000 a year or less, more than half the American workforce now lives on those sort of wages. Now, you need a few people. You need to live as a commune to kind of get by there, or a trailer park, or live in the shittiest end of town where there's nothing but shrieking and gunfire going through the night. So that's the sort of thing. Now when there's wage pressure, whether it's shortage of real skills or just shortage of workers generally, whether you're working in the chicken shop or something, the first thing that Western governments are now doing, in fact, it's an instant, immediate reflex. The first thing they do is bring in as many illiterate peasants as they possibly can. Now, this is argued it keeps these people can be employed very cheaply. It keeps costs down, so reduces, so they say, inflation. But that's not how it actually works. These people are paid shit money, and the owners of the businesses, and particularly the bigger businesses, the capital, they're the ones that are making the money, and they're making, in some cases, extraordinary profits. And they're having to bribe government officials to get the monopolies and all that sort of thing. So the cost of that still being passed on to the consumer, and if it is supposed to be reducing costs, then I can't see any evidence of it. I went to look was just going past a section in the local supermarket a couple of days ago, and they've got a sandwich, ready-made sort of cut sandwiches. There's a section there, and the sandwiches there are sort of average price of $5 to $6, and there's nothing fancy there. We're not talking top of the range ham and this, that, and the thing. It's cheap stuff, and so those are the costs. So the cost of 2 sandwiches is more than like a cooked chicken, for example. So you can see the labour cost there, as much as it's supposed to be low. It definitely isn't feeding into the price. It's feeding into the profits of the owners of the business. Now, also looking at minimum wages and other ways, that the Chinese and the Indians in Australia, at least, and elsewhere, as I've noticed, are really big at buying into franchises, fast food, takeout food type franchises, and takeout chicken or burgers or anything, and they're big in buying pizzas. They're really big in buying into that, and then bringing in, all their peasant buddies from the subcontinent or from rural China. You also see the same thing with, say, manicuring salons and that sort of stuff. So they bring out all these peasant girls or family relatives, and what they do is they put them up in an apartment and we can be talking 12, 15, even 20 people to a 2-bedroom apartment. They put them up in an apartment owned by the Brahmin, the big rich Brahmin goon from India, owned by that, and they put them in there, and they then put a value on that rent, and that rent comes out of their pay. So if they get, say they even get the minimum wage, you know, half of it's going to go in the rent that these people have to take, so they got to stay in that apartment. There's another quarter of it gets taken out for the food supplied, and then they're allowed what's left, but they're told where they have to shop. So if they shop at anything, they have to shop at or buy stuff at the shops that are owned by the Chinese or Indian sort of group, you know, the so-called investor there. So really, it's of no use to the fucking local economy. But they still pay the minimum wage. But this is how they get around actually paying it in real terms. Other scams that are used are things like you know, the Chinese are probably worse than this. The Indians, they bring out the peasants from their homeland, and they go, okay, well, I'll give you a job, but I have to be satisfied you're good at the job, and you have to keep on working for free until I say, you know, till the owner says, until I'm happy enough with your work to pay you. And they work they work some of these kids, the young people, they work some of them, 70, 80 hours a week. It's a real sweatshop. And they'll get, a month, 2 months free out of them. And then, okay, all right, I'll pay you. But now you have to pay me back for the accommodation and the food I let you have in the meantime. And so it's a terrible scam. But this goes on as well. Coming back to the concept of just minimum wage, minimum wage itself is irrelevant. I mean, if 1 cent a year as a payment for work is a good pay, if a house only costs 2 cents, if you can buy 10,000 loaves of bread for half a cent. So the idea of the minimum wage itself in isolation is not really relevant. It's the cost of living. What can you buy with the minimum wage, or any wage for that matter? And this is really the economic issue. Now, if we look at the West, as I've pointed out, the cost of living is 2.5 to 3 times higher today than it was in, say, 1970. So the growth of wages is for every $3 of cost of living, there's only $1 increase in wages, and over the time since 1970, the living standards have plummeted. Now, there's a few things that offset that create a mirage of plenty. One is credit is very, very easy to come by now compared to what it was in 1970. So in 1970, you had to be disciplined with money because you had to save up a pretty decent sized deposit if you wanted to buy something, or indeed save up the cash to buy it. The idea of going into debt just for consumerism was even frowned upon, I think, a little bit back then, and it was a sign of someone's financial recklessness or carelessness. Even today, borrowing money or to have on the spot consumer satisfaction is now considered how things are. In fact, I've noticed you can do anything. I mean, I was going to buy a spare part for the car, and it was only a cheap part. It was like $50 or something. And they offered that it could be paid over 5 months for $50. So this is how much, and this is why people on very modest incomes can still sort of play, if you like, in the consumer society today. Not because they've got the purchasing power, but because they've got the access to credit. So the access to credit, and that's a lot of consumer goods, televisions as an example, that were very expensive relative to pay in 1970, and now quite cheap relative to pay. So I remember buying my first TV years ago, and this is before flat screens had come out. It was still the old cathode ray tube thing, and I remember buying it, and I think, holy shit, I must have spent like $600 on it. But this was then when average wages were like $10,000 a year. So that it gives you an idea of the cost of the TV relative to wages, and thus the purchasing power required to acquire a television. Now you can get a really, really good television for less than $1,000. So if for somebody who wants to, if someone on a low wage wants to buy it, they can do that, but only based on the credit. And there's no severe credit checks and things like that. In fact, I'm surprised how much debt people can rack up, without any sort of probity or scrutiny over their capacity to pay it or whatever. This just seems to be given out. And there's a guy, a friend of mine's daughter's boyfriend. He'd acquired sort of a couple of $100,000 in debt in all sorts of toys, fancy cars, you name it. And he had no capacity to pay it back. So it was a major exercise for for my buddy to help his daughter get the boyfriend out of trouble. So, the average wage, it's not as simple as wages go up, everyone loses their job, or many people loses their job. There's also various levels of skill and capacity and ability to get looked at. It just means there's a revisiting of why do we have this person employed, and that gets looked at. It does. I think it does. If the jump of average wages is substantial, then the bigger the jump, the more individual employees are going to be scrutinised for what's this guy doing? Is he really worth the money we're paying him? That sort of thing. Now I've noticed in even the takeout food shops like McDonald's or any of them really, that the quality of the people that they're hiring is wow, it is rock bottom. It used to be really good. You used to get young, keen, eager kids working there, 16 years old. It was a way to make sort of extra money after school and on weekends, that sort of stuff. It's good training for the kids, I thought. But you don't see that now. You're lucky to find someone that speaks English. I mean, just a case in point, a few days ago I had to go into the city to do a few things. I'd seen an advert online for one of the takeout food chains, and seen an advert for a particular burger they were advertising for a lunch, like a lunchtime special deal or lunchtime deal, whatever they call it. And so, and I remembered part of it, but I went in and asked for it, and the first person really didn't speak English. You kind of had to be very precise. They just can match exact phrases, but that's all. Then, okay, I can manage it for you. And so the manager comes over. The manager was barely any better at English. In fact, I reckon they employed the manager because he could speak the language of, which was sounded like a Cantonese dialect from what I could tell. So he came over and he was no better. He had to precisely know it was on a scroll, so the specials were like on this scrolling sort of image board, but it's scrolling really slowly. So how long do I want to wait here? Now I remember, for example, it was apple pie with cream ice cream and cinnamon, but I didn't remember the cinnamon bit. It was apple pie with cream and ice cream. I remember it wasn't apple pie, but for example, but I didn't remember the cinnamon. And these people, because their English is non-existent, they can only go on exact match. Now, if their English is any good, they would say, well, do you mean the apple pie with cream ice cream and cinnamon? That's it. That's the one. But I'd forgotten the cinnamon bit. So they just stood there sort of wide-eyed. We don't know what you want. We don't know what you mean. We don't know, just don't understand, because they can only deal with the exact matching. Now, these people are being paid the minimum wage. And God knows how they think they're worth it. Are you saying that there isn't anybody who can do that job, who can speak English? Well, I just don't believe that. So we're looking at a situation today where the bigger employers, particularly the mass employers, are being heavied by governments, by Western governments who are controlled by the globalists. You will employ 40% non-white people. You will employ 50% lesbians, or they're getting dictated to. They're told this is what you will do. In return, we'll give you a monopoly. We won't let another restaurant open up, for two kilometres from here. So you've got to guarantee. But the government in return is giving guarantees, which is forcing the price of things up. So we're actually paying more now for the privilege of having piss poor service and giving minimum wages to people who couldn't earn it if they had to compete in the marketplace. Now, this brings me to the next point, the final point, which is competition. If you want to keep prices keen and you want to have the best people employed, the most capable people for the money you have to pay them, you must have open market competition. because when you want to be the best, you supply the best products, the best services, or find your niche where you can do the maximum amount of value add, high tech this or whatever. When you're trying to do that, you have to have the best people, and to get the best people, you usually have to pay them more. You typically have to pay them more, or give them other benefits. Maybe it's prestige, maybe it's a super cool lunchroom or something like that. But you've got to give them something to attract those sort of skills, and of course to keep them. So market competition is what keeps prices down and keeps the wages at its highest for skills. This has all been perverted and inverted and corrupted in the West now, again under the globalist direction, where the globalists don't have to compete. They want businesses that have guaranteed profits, guaranteed zero risk profits. To do that, they have to have cartel, monopoly, oligopoly type pricing. I mean, look at the COVID fiasco. If you want to see what's going on there, they can't have competitive tenders, these sorts of things. Sure, the little bullshit tenders at the bottom, that they can compete there, but the big ticket stuff, companies are being given huge government, billions and billions of government business, but on the proviso that they bring in hundreds of thousands of third world peasants to the West. So they're giving, it's a quid pro quo thing. The globalists say, well, we'll give you plenty of profits, easy profits, guaranteed profits. You don't have to compete. You won't have to compete, but you have to do this. We want to see lots of lesbians in upper management, and we're bringing, you have to bring out lots of peasants from the third world into the West. So they're being rewarded for this. So competition doesn't exist anymore. But the globalists say in the cost inputs, labour, that sort of thing, there should be competition. Labour's about the only thing where they'll accept the bottom end labour. I mean, there's no competition between chief executives. That's all divvied out amongst buddies. But when it comes to workers, any sort of hands-on production, whether it be a computer programmer or some dude digging holes or anything like that, nursing, then they want maximum in competition. There has to be, two people sort of chasing every job. That's how they reduce. That's how they reduce wages and how they increase levels of dependency. I'm coming back again to the half the American workforce living on between the minimum and the average wage. So that's how they keep their profits high, keep pushing up the cost of living whilst artificially depressing wages. But what it means is no market forces are operating. There's no market forces are applying here. It's all rigged and fixed. And that's a tragedy. It's leading to a terrible loss of wealth in the West generally. And it's leading to the youth of today to have there's a futility there. As they look into the future, they're never going to have a stake in society. Other than inheritance, they're never going to own property. In terms of being able to afford children and that sort of thing, or getting married, that sort of thing, that's like way off in the distance. They'll be lucky if they can afford that by the time they're 40, let alone when they're 30, 25, whatever. So this futility of their existence has been brought about, it's been created, it's been forced on us by the globalists. The globalists say, holy shit, we've got to make sure these people are distracted. Let's hammer them with global warming and racism and gender equity, and let's give them the full battery there. So why do you have no future, Billy Bob or Billy Jean? Why do you have no future? Why are you going to live your life? I mean, you'll be grateful to die. Because that'll be the only way you'll get out of this endless futility. And why is that? It's because those damn white fascist Nazi Hitlers, they did it to you. It's them. Those guys, it's nothing to do with us. We didn't do it. And that's sort of where we're heading and where it's gone. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.